Welcome everyone to the webinar that's hosted here by the International Society for Quality of Life Studies. We would like to introduce our speakers today. Bryan Smale, I hope I said that correctly. A PhD is Director of the Canadian Index of Wellbeing, housed in the Faculty of Health at the University of Waterloo. He's an Emeritus Professor in the Department of Recreation and Leisure Studies and cross-appointed in the Department of Geography and Environmental Management. He received his PhD in Geography from the University of Western Ontario and both his Master's and BA in Leisure Studies at the University of Waterloo. Our next speaker is Taylor Hill. She's the Research and Data Lead. She is a PhD student in experimental psychology at Dalhousie University with a strong interest in methodology. With her doctoral work, she is developing a translational research program rooted in well-being science to understand psychosocial and community resources that contribute to positive mental health and healthy communities. The overall goal of her research is to contribute to an evidence-based base that can inform policy, programming, and practice in improving population mental health and well-being. And our final speaker, Danny Graham, Chief Engagement Officer for Engage Nova Scotia, an independent nonprofit that is leading the Nova Scotia Quality of Life Initiative with an extensive network of partners from the public, private, and academic community sectors, provincially, nationally, and internationally. So now we want to turn this over to our speakers to present putting quality of life data in the fingertips of society.
Thank you, Jill. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for being here today. It's really a pleasure to participate in one of these webinars and share some of the things that I think are really quite exciting, where perhaps the biggest message is around knowledge mobilization, actually taking really foundational research and seeing how it can be put into action within communities. I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about the conceptual foundation behind the work that's been going on in Nova Scotia, but also in the rest of Canada as well, by giving you the background on the Canadian Index of Wellbeing and how we came about and what we've been striving to do over the years. So let me try to get this moving. So basically, our vision for the CIW has always been to try to share information about the well-being, the quality of life of Canadians in an accessible way, drawing on measures that are publicly accessible, that tell a more fulsome story about the progress we're making. I used to talk about the inadequacies of GDP as a measure of social progress. I think everyone's well beyond that point now. So we really were in response to that because we got started over 20 years ago to try to develop a strategy for a complementary measure to GDP that actually got to social progress, and that defined the vision that we had. So ultimately, and I'll give you a little bit of background on this in a moment, but it did lead to our conceptual framework, which is based around these 8 domains of life that people have identified as being particularly critical to defining how well they're doing, their overall quality of life. So our index is built on 64 indicators, 8 of which are in each domain, that all come together with a composite index that we use as really a conversation starter to show how well our well-being has been tracking over time. Now, these 8 domains, 4 of them, seem fairly familiar, and many people might regard as essential. Things like healthy populations, living standards, the environment, and education. And they're certainly, determine and define the political news cycles whenever debates around where we want to go as a nation come up. But the other 4 domains, I think, are particularly interesting and critical to quality of life. Things like community vitality, time use, which is really like work-life balance, democratic engagement, and leisure and culture. And our research has demonstrated that those 4 domains, perhaps even more so than the ones that are regarded as essential, are ones that allow people to thrive. They're the things that really define and move their quality of life in important ways. So how did we actually come to this framework? Well, unlike a lot of the other systems that are available that are largely expert-driven, And that's not an inadequacy. It's just largely, the way that they've been developed. And they tend to take shape based on what data are actually available to populate domains like the ones you see here, which are not untypical of what you've seen probably in many other frameworks, like the Social Progress Index, the OECD's Better Life Index, and so forth. But we decided we started a grassroots citizen-led approach. So back in the early 2000s, we actually convened about 15 focus groups across the country with everyday Canadians, experts, government officials, Indigenous peoples. We're all invited to the table and asked what should have been a fairly simple question, one would think. What makes your life good? What matters to you? And we ended up with thousands of pages of transcripts that we had to decipher. And that eventually led to the 8 domains. So those were the domains that repeatedly came up in those conversations that people pointed to that said, if things are going well in that domain, then my life is going fairly well as well. So the domains are actually critical to the framework because they recognize that each one of those systems, if you will, combine to form a larger complex system of interconnected ideas, all of which work together to define our quality of life. But we also wanted to say, okay, what are the kinds of measures that actually reflect something about those domains that we can actually track over time that may be the levers that we can pull to say, if we move these things, we'll start to see some changes in quality of life, not just in that area, but in other areas as well. So the second stage of this was to go to research teams that had expertise in each one of those domain areas, and they were charged with coming up with a conceptual definition of the domain, as well as identify potential indicators that would reflect the progress we're making within that domain. So we had people responsible for democratic engagement, for living standards, and so forth. Now, the living standards domain, the healthy populations domain, the indicators there came together fairly quickly because very often there's lots of data in that area. Areas like time use, leisure and culture, community vitality, the data is a little bit thinner on the ground, but we still wanted it to drive the decision about what was going to be reflected in the framework. And so once the research groups had reported back on each one of their domains, we began the process of selecting indicators. And we had a raft of criteria. There was about 20 in total, but these were probably the most important ones that drove the selection of the indicators. So any indicator, coming from data sources, principally from Statistics Canada, our federal statistics agency, it had to have a strong conceptual fit to the domain. It had to make sense. And so the research had to show that there was relatively unequivocal evidence that this indicator either contributed to or detracted from, if it was a negative indicator, people's overall well-being. So it had to be a clear contributor or detractor in that regard. It had to be valid, of course, and it had to be reliable because we did want to track these things over time. So we wanted consistent measures gathered in that way. And then there's these other criteria as well, including ones that will be reflected today, decent coverage of geography as well, so that we could drill down a little bit to understand how place-based meanings of quality of life may change across the country. Now, what we faced, of course, doing it this way by having it citizen-driven was that there were data challenges because, as I mentioned, there was all kinds of economic and a fair amount of health-related data, but not so much on the social stuff. So we had to work really hard to populate the indicators within those domains for which there were not as abundant data sources out there. Now, just to give you a sense of how that whole process worked, the framework for the Canadian Index of Wellbeing, those are the 8 domains that emerged from the conversations through the focus groups. And the research teams contributed to, and I'll give you an example of one of the domains, community vitality here. This is the kind of conceptual definition that the research teams put together for each one of the domains. So the 2 principal subdimensions or dimensions within community vitality were social relationships and social norms and values. And within those, there were subdimensions that captured the essence of those particular aspects of community vitality. Once we had those guiding principles around the dimensions, then we could start to identify indicators that were good conceptual fits that would flesh out each one of the domains in a meaningful way. So if we look at community safety, one of the measures was we wanted something related to community-based safety. And that led us to identifying a couple of indicators. One objective, the crime severity index, which is based on police reports of severe crimes across the country. And one subjective, people's actual perceptions of how safe they feel in their neighborhood, walking alone at night, feeling safe from crime. So once we had all of those, we could populate the entire, framework. We could report trends over time. We found that well-being, was not making as much progress as GDP, and it really started conversations about the kinds of things that mattered and how they were interconnected. Now, we've done this at the national level several times. We've also done it for 4 of the provinces and 1 of the territories. But we got increasingly questions from smaller regions and even municipalities that wanted to build the index within their communities, because they're much more nimble and can take action to make change that they wanted to see for their residents more quickly. And we realized that the data was just not disaggregatable down to those lower levels of geography. So what we did is that we took the framework and said, let's design a community well-being survey that draws on the 8 domains, uses many of the same questions that are used from some of the national data sources we use to develop the index, but asked residents within those communities, essentially in real time, how well they're doing in each one of those domains. It also asked questions on different measures of well-being, a 16-item scale that was reflective of the CIW framework. We also included the the OECD measures of general life satisfaction as well as purpose in life. So both a eudaimonic and hedonic measures of satisfaction, of quality of life in that regard, and a whole raft of demographic characteristics, because we were working with community consortiums, large groups within those communities that were interested in different subgroups within the population that they would like to serve better if they understood the kind of challenges they were facing to actually improve their quality of life. Now, we've been in about 16 different communities all across the country, from British Columbia all the way down to the East Coast. And the example we're going to be talking about today is from Nova Scotia, where we did the largest community well-being survey across the entire province. And Danny will tell you more about that in a moment. Now, one of the really gratifying things about this was that with consultations over the last few years, I'd like to say that we've had a fair amount of influence on shaping the federal government's new quality of life framework, which was released in April of 2021. And as you can see, their framework has 5 domains that make up its framework, which are very similar to our 8. And they are also measuring indicators, many of which we already had in the CIW. And this will inform government policy in terms of where to invest to actually enhance well-being. And Canada has already identified, being a participant in the We All Gov organization for a well-being economy, and as we're observing and moving forward on that. Something else that has also come up in recent years as well, that is of increasing interest from both the national all the way down to the local level, is how does this type of framework relate to the SDGs? And so not that long ago, we actually mapped all our indicators, both from the index approach as well as the survey approach, to all 17 of the SDGs described by the UN and its targets. And this shows you how many indicators are in our framework and in our survey work that actually relates to each one of those goals and the targets there within. And one of the things that I think is important is that these are not competing frameworks, but rather the well-being approach probably gives a more not reasonable, but a more accessible narrative for citizens to embrace, that if we do these things, if we move on these particular areas, we'll not only improve our own quality of life, but we can make contributions towards the progress on each of these goals that the SDGs have identified. So they're complementary. The well-being approach gives us a narrative in that regard. So all of these things were happening. We got involved with Nova Scotia to run the survey there in the province. So the rest of the presentation is basically going to address this question. How has Engage Nova Scotia taken up the knowledge gained from this type of work, made it accessible to the public, in other words, done the knowledge transfer, but also mobilized it in a way that brings about real social change? And so I'm going to hand it over to Danny now, and he'll tell you a little bit more about the details of what's going on in Nova Scotia.
Thanks so much, Brian. Just checking to see if my volume is being received. Thanks for the nod on that, Taylor. My colleague, Taylor Hill, is going to be sharing this part of the presentation for a short bit when I'm in the slides. a little bit later on. So thanks everyone for your interest in this discussion. I'm coming to you from Nova Scotia, Canada. And it's a place that has always been known as Mi'kma'ki for the Indigenous people of our province. And we're delighted to sort of share more about what it is that we've been doing together with our many partners that I'm going to describe a little bit. So we're going to do a bit of a PowerPoint slide that's going to be up on your screens right now. And then we're going to switch to some tools, and we're going to come to the PowerPoint slides, and ultimately we'll be back into a conversation amongst all of us. First of all, something that's unusual about what we're doing here in Nova Scotia relates to the fact that we're actually a nonprofit that likes to say that we're at the intersection of the public, private, academic, and community sectors. And our mission is to change the approach to improving quality of life for everyone. The work we're doing is most predominantly related to the Quality of Life Initiative right now, but you can find out more about the many and different ways that we've been doing our work on our website at engagenovascotia.ca. This work began back in 2015 when we were curious about some questions that hadn't yet, we felt, been asked. And it's sort of the big question of how should we measure our success? And we provided respondents to a 1,000-person survey, in this case, 1,000 persons. I'll say more about a larger census that we did, with a scale of 1 to 10, answer 1 by improvement in our quality of life, and then an entirely separate answer about measuring our success by growth in our economy. And you can see that when we first asked this question back in 2015, we were actually surprised at the degree to which those who answered between 7 and 10 and said improvement in our quality of life differed from people's identification as growth in our economy. Something important to say about the interplay between those two. Happy to get into a discussion about their interdependence, especially for populations of people who need to rely on a more robust economy in order to ensure their quality of life. We've measured this 2 times since the pandemic, and you'll see that there has been a striking decline in the answers for people agreeing to economic growth, driven predominantly by women, whose North Star less is in the nature of economic growth as their particular priority for success. What we're trying to emphasize here is that in a province that has often almost exclusively focused on economic and population growth as the North Stars, that there was something more fundamental, or at least as fundamental in a circular way, the quality of life in our communities that really created a virtuous circle that cannot be forgotten, but in many respects gets lost in the public discourse. So this slide is intended to reflect the way in which, with the less visible notions tied to quality of life, we have been unpacking something that is surprising and revelatory to all sectors in our society. So as Bryan mentioned, we undertook the survey that the CIW had done. We did a consultation with Nova Scotians, and we mailed out on 2 occasions requests to participate in this survey, randomly selected, Canada Post supported, 230 question survey. And the response back by both number and age was really quite encouraging. 13,000 Nova Scotians responded to this massive survey that was weighted by age, sex, and region. It wouldn't have happened without the support from a cross-sector of organizations in all regions of the province and all levels of government that said, this is actually an important item for us to be focused on. And we like to focus on here, or at least point to, is that it's even the power corporation for our province with the environmental advocate organization, Ecology Action Centre, that show up in the same logo soup, if you will, saying, this is important despite our differences. So economic, equality-seeking organizations all tied into this interesting notion. And it gave us what turned out to be something that some of our colleagues in Ottawa have called a census on the well-being of our students. Statistics Canada looked at this after Bryan and his amazing team at the University of Waterloo received ethics approval and provided all of the weighting for this, as they had with the many other communities that they have worked with. And you'll see that it gives us a very reliable margin of error across all regions of our province. Now, you may be wondering, for those who aren't familiar with North America, where the heck is Nova Scotia? And I'll be showing some of that to you in just a moment. It is a small province of about 1 million people. And this will give you a sense that in each of these geographic regions of the province, we have reliable information for each one of them. And if one were to look at the demographic profiles that we're able to understand, because of the nature of the questions that we've asked, across that black bar that you see, really reliable information about people by age, region, level of education, living arrangement, disability, and more, across those domains that Bryan has spoken about already. And I won't dial into right now because you've seen them and we're going to touch on them in a moment. I'm going to take you to some tools. We've been so appreciative of the relationship that we've created with academics, including Taylor, who you're going to hear from as our research and data coordinator in a moment. But the work that we did with the Faculty of Computer Sciences at Dalhousie really started to break ground, where we were able to move beyond just findings related to reports that show up in people's reports, and actually began to develop an understanding for Nova Scotians that brought us to an entirely different level of understanding geographically and demographically. So we're really excited about these tools. We hope you are too, and we're going to give you a quick feature on what they look like. First of all, so that you know where Nova Scotia is, for people who are less familiar with Canada, this is our province, 1 million people on the east coast of Canada. And I mentioned that we have 8 domains of well-being. We're going to touch on those in just a moment, but I'm conscious that ISQOLS is an organization that pays attention to some high level, like life satisfaction kind of questions that are important in this work. And as Bryan mentioned earlier, we have both the hedonic and eudaimonic questions loaded into our mapping tool here. And I'm just going to give you a quick feel for answers, how this tool works. It's publicly available on our website. So if you go to engagenovascotia.ca, you'll be able to find the answers and use this tool and toggle around with a tutorial on this particular question. So, and 150 or so other questions. You'll quickly see that I just chose one of those 150 or so questions to demonstrate that we, on the life satisfaction question, for folks familiar, of course, with quality of life, invites people to provide an answer on a scale of 1 to 10 to how satisfied are you with your life in general. And you'll see that it runs from very satisfied to very dissatisfied, with almost all of our respondents answering between 7 and 9, where the lighter colors represent a stronger answer, of course, and darker colors representing more concerns. And you'll see right away that there are differences between 7 and 9 across all regions of the province, which show up by these color codes. And we have the ability with this tool actually to go into more densely populated areas of our province. This particular area here, for anybody familiar with our province, represents the most populous. About 500,000 people live in this area called Halifax. It's where our organization is headquartered. And you'll see that across neighborhoods of Halifax, we have different answers to this question about people's life satisfaction. This tool also provides us with this fancy lasso item that you'll see allows me to circle around these postal codes that give us potentially different answers for people in clustered geographic areas relative to the provincial average. So I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on this tool because you'll have the ability to sort of find it yourself and imagine what it looks like. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go to the color differences, but we've been invited by the provincial government for reasons that are rather tragic in Nova Scotia to help them understand back in 2019 what was happening in this particular postal code of our province where a terrible tragedy happened, and they want to understand intersectionally and intergenerationally the answers of relevant questions for the 300 or so respondents who responded in this postal code here, starting with the forward citation letter and numbers B0M. So I won't go into this in much greater detail, except to say that that's just one of our many questions. I want to give you a sense that those are the high-level questions that we have. I'll just give you a quick sense because we think that the scores related to community vitality are incredibly important to the well-being of Nova Scotians. And you'll see that in the data drawer that we have, these are the domains that we've pointed to now a number of times, those 8 domains. Within community vitality, we have a variety of different questions related to perceptions of safety and trust, to people's experiences of discrimination, and so on and so forth. But within it, you'll see that even within the sense of community scores, we have a sub-data drawer. And these categories that I'm just hovering over are actually aggregations of different scores tied to a variety of 12 different questions in the survey itself. Taylor's going to say something in a little bit about one of these questions, the overall measure of sense of community, when we come back out to our scores, and just the importance of the aggregation of 12 sense of community scores are. But as it relates to something that's often measured nationally, this issue of sense of belonging to community, just share with you this. We found to reveal to us some really interesting results. Now, I'm just going to push a button and you'll see the colors on the map change as we look at this particular question. And you'll see that these questions were asked on a 7-point scale, from very strong, people having a very strong sense of belonging to community to a very weak sense of belonging to community. So lots that we could do to sort of go deeper into each of those questions. But in the interest of time, we want to give you another feel for what this looks like by going to a tool that's so exciting that Taylor and I still call it Whiz Bam Boom. And it really has us jazzed about the potential features related to it. Now, one of the things that we sometimes talk about, and many of you would be familiar with, is that in our data drawer, what we've learned is that geography matters, but demography matters more. And what we mean by that is that it's less about where you live and more about your living arrangements and or the disadvantages that you have in your life that informs the challenges and opportunities that you're going to have. So again, with Leonardo Cristino, a scholar who's fantastic and a computer scientist, in alphabetical order, you'll see that we've created data drawers on issues related to people who identify as being African Nova Scotian, or who have children, or chronic illnesses, or low confidence in institutions, or disability or discrimination, different education levels, all the way down to many things. That includes other ways of examining our stories about life satisfaction, or people's housing experiences, or their problems with health or the healthcare system. But we wanted to give you a quick view at a geographic finding that we think is interesting. And then we're going to switch out to a particular region of our province to tell you one more piece of information. So we wanted to understand in this regional municipality, what's the story across the differences that show up for what is essentially one regional area of Halifax, which actually is broken up into urban suburban, and rural areas of the province. Now, in reading this, the first thing for you to note is that the color coding for the 8 domains shows up as pink for community vitality, blue for healthy populations, fuchsia for democratic engagement, environment being green, leisure and culture being sort of a forest green. I'm not sure on my colors. Education, living standards, which talks about work and jobs, but also affordability, and then really important issues tied to time adequacy. So that's all on the left-hand side of this Whiz Bam Boom tool. What you'll also see is that there is a gradation across yellows and purples, where yellows represent strengths and assets, purples represent concerns. The darker the purple, the greater the concern, the brighter the yellow, the greater the strength of this. And so you'll see right away that there are differences in one single municipality across urban, suburban, and rural divides. I won't go into this in the interest of time in great detail. Happy to talk about water quality and air quality, but also experiences of safety and discrimination, which really are starkly different in some of these regions of the province. The most prominent of these, however, perhaps not surprisingly, relates to people's access to education and access to facilities that help for them to live across these urban and rural divides, to upgrade their education, or to access the facilities that keep their children active and living in a productive kind of way in their communities. And quite striking differences we see with assets in the urban areas and significant concerns in HRM. We like to say that something's statistically reliable if the measure is above 0.2. You'll see many of the numbers on your screen right now, strikingly above that 0.2 number. Now, I'm going to take you out for the final sort of look at this within the tool to a region of our province populated by about 100,000 residents. And we mentioned that geography matters, as we point out here, in urban and rural differences, but demography matters much more. And so we were asked by the mayor of this particular other regional municipality, for whom there were 2,000 respondents to our survey, can you help our council understand the importance of community inclusion and the quality of life for some residents not being the same as the quality of life for the mean, if you will. So here are the results that we were invited to speak to, and we were specifically invited to talk about the issues of affordability in this particular region of our province. And what we were able to say is that here are the answers in the first column about the 2,000 residents overall, but you'll see that we've broken this down to include household incomes below $40,000, young adults, adults over the ages of 65, families being led by single parents, and persons with disabilities. And you will see that these community vitality scores are strikingly different for each of those groups. Taylor's going to tell you a story about the overall sense of community. This one right here, it turns out to be a particularly important one. You'll see that there are differences across each of these demographic groups. But just to give you a quick feel for how this works, this is the affordability question. And when we put this up for the counselors, we were able to show overall, your residents have an affordability level or a poverty level, if you will, that is at the provincial average with these muted slight purples colors. But of course, if you have a lower income, but surprisingly, perhaps for some, if you are a younger adult, or if you're a single parent, or if you have a disability, there are enormous differences across your experiences right underneath your noses. And a feature that we've been able to use that demonstrates the differences here would be to start with, okay, that's a whole lot of information. How do we begin to put this into chunk sizes that allows for people to understand it in digestible fashions? So what I'm about to show you is the digestible version of what it looks like for, in general, older adults in this particular region, those over the age of 65. What are their purples and what are their yellows? And In order of what their greatest concerns are, you'll see that there are more assets for older adults in this community than there are concerns, but still pretty important and notable concerns for older adults in this particular region of the province. Time adequacy being a strength, low perceptions of healthcare being a concern, and low confidence in institutions. Look what happens when we switch just the ages of the respondents for this region. Really striking concerns that show up for younger adults in this community. And it was when we pushed this button that the counselors had an audible guffaw, and they started to realize, oh, wow. And then when we told them the stories with notables for those having incomes under $40,000, you'll see that the intensity of concerns are similar to those younger adults, but the pattern of colors about what are their issues shows up differently for that group. And they show up differently for single parents that I've just pushed on here, and differently for, look at what happens when we look at the story of CBRM folks with disabilities. So that's a lot. And I'm just going to give you a quick feel for another feature that we have in this. You may be asking lots of questions about how much can you influence political leaders with this? Well, we're hoping that through the features in this tool that give us a meta statement up at the top, and then percentages about the story of their life satisfaction or their feelings of life being worthwhile, being digestible, and we can just cut and screenshot this into a Word document that is usable for somebody at a later date. And I want to go back to, there is another feature that shows violin graphs, but I'm mindful of the time that comes with this. And I want perhaps, while I'm pulling up this next screen, Taylor, to just interject about the way in which the methodology rigor of this gets us to an understanding about things like sense of community. And then I'll just come out for the final sort of set of slides that we have that give you a feel for the big picture and how this is showing up in municipal policy decisions. Taylor, over to you.
Thanks. So like we said briefly, sense of community is this aggregate score that we calculate from 12 different survey questions that cover 3 different themes within what we consider sense of community. And this measure was developed by community psychologists a couple of decades ago, and it measures themes related to social climate and bonds, help in case of need, and social need fulfillment. So the idea is that higher sense of community would reflect like better social health and well-being. So feeling connected to others, having close others that would help out in times of need, and living in a community where your social needs are fulfilled. And because we asked nearly 13,000 Nova Scotians about their sense of community on these 12 questions, but then also asked them a lot of other questions about their behaviors, perceptions, and feelings, it allows us to draw those links between sense of community and indicators of well-being across those 8 domains. And there was an analysis that we did earlier this year where we're moving beyond that kind of traditional regression analysis that we see a lot in psychology and in economics. And we actually used a new statistical technique called relative importance based on the Linderman, Miranda, and Gold method that's from the RELAMPO package in R. And this is a general statistical method that's been around for a while, but it hasn't really been used in well-being, let alone been used in a data set that is so unique in size and scope that represents an entire province. And so when we looked at what contributes to sense of community and what is most important to sense of community and to life satisfaction, we found that when we're looking at what contributes to people's higher sense of life satisfaction, we found that having high scores on sense of community is more important than a lot of social determinants of health. And it's more important than financial security, physical health, being in a relationship, having a chronic illness or having a disability, feeling safe in your neighborhood, how old you are, if you volunteered in the past year, if you work for pay, if you're a parent, if you belong to a faith-based group, or if you're new to Canada. So what this tells us is that sense of community is twice as important to life satisfaction as most social determinants of health are in this data set. And it tells us how important sense of community is for your overall general life perception. And if you're going to the ISQOLS conference in Rotterdam in August, I'll tell you more about that analysis and what we found.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Taylor. We'll be available in a moment for a few questions. I'm just going to round us out with some big picture items. So this is our province, a place that we love and care about, and we know that there are too many people falling behind. And we also know that too often we've put our North Stars up as economic development, population growth, and not really, as the mayor saw, I had a sense of how to actually do you improve the quality of life for everyone? How do you create an inclusive society? And so we were able to show them, this is a screenshot capture of what you just saw. And you saw these other features where we showed the differences between the assets and concerns of older adults and the assets and concerns of younger adults. And by the end of that meeting that we just recently had with them, they put on the table for a vote next Tuesday this notion that community inclusion indeed needs to be a new and additional North Star to the other North Stars that they had in their strategic plan. What comes of that, we hope, will result in so many of the stories of those people who have been left behind and unseen, their concerns being addressed. What we think we've been able to, and these are the flattering descriptions that Statistics Canada has given to us as they've looked at what we're able to do at and is more difficult for a national organization to do. So we're able to create hyperlocal, intersectional, and nimble evidence, which allows for, if one is only a fiscal conservative and all they want is the evidence to make better and smarter decisions to address the social and environmental and economic challenges that exist in their communities, this body of evidence, which is now at the fingertips of our governments with us as a nonprofit independent partner, allows them to plan, budget, and measure much better than they have before. We're planning a next quality of life survey with more persons with the same questions, and then some refreshed questions, and with particular emphasis on hard to reach communities who don't trust surveys. Lots that we can share about what we did to get reliable samples in what we have from 2019. And we'll have these tools available at people's fingertips, and perhaps even tools that allow us to mine to a more granular geographic level, but also give us the ability to compare what's happened pre-pandemic and post-pandemic using these new tools and the filters that we hope to be able to put on it. As Bryan pointed out, this is related and quite similar in concept to the federal quality of life framework that we too were invited to inform before it was launched in 2021. And as he mentioned, at a global level, this is obviously quite connected to the SDGs, and we're fortunate to have a funded SDG initiative that's, and in fact, we've created a publication that links up the Nova Scotia findings against the 17 goals in some detail in a document that we have created. Time doesn't allow for me to go into that in great detail. So I'm going to go to full screens. We can go back to any of the slides and to the this, but please feel free to contact for Engage, Taylor, Riley Urban, who's on our call, and or me to learn more about what it is that we've been up to and how we're continuing to establish this proof of concept and make a field where we ultimately do have a more inclusive society here. Jill, you're back on screen, so I'll stop talking and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Taylor and Bryan. Fascinating presentation, just an impressive data sample and all of your research. It's really, really impressive. And thank you so much for sharing. This is the time for questions and answers. If anyone has a question, feel free to, you can either unmute yourself, feel free to turn your camera on. You can raise your hand, you can write that question in the chat bar. It looks like we had some questions. I think they were already addressed by Taylor reference to the new method. So it looks like Taylor already posted that. I'm wondering if we could share your surveys with the group. Would you be open to that?
Bryan, you can speak to that.
We do it on an ad hoc basis as opposed to just throwing it out there because I either have to blame or credit my university with trying to protect my IP. And, but my feeling is that I would prefer to share so that others can, make use of similar types of metrics to see how communities compare. Because whenever we've run the community well-being survey across the country, and this is part of the reason, Danny mentioned this as well, is that repeating the same questions allows for comparisons across communities as well as upward comparisons if the questions are derived from some of the national surveys. And that's usually the first question we get, will we be able to compare ourselves to others? And so maintaining its integrity is particularly important. And that's why I like to share it so people can do this on their own. I'm not going to always do it for other people. But I have to respect the intellectual property policy here as well. So I usually do it on an ad hoc basis. If people are interested, they get a do not copy with a wink.
Understood. So we'll post your email address. And if they're if they're wanting to contact you directly, they can do it that way. Questions about, you might have talked about this, the general cost of living in Nova Scotia. Is it relatively high? Is it compared to other Canadian provinces? What would you say?
I'll take a stab at that. It is, there are aspects of cost of living that are lower and there are aspects that are higher. In general, provincial taxes are higher than a number of the other provinces. In general, housing, although it's quickly rising, is lower than it is in other jurisdictions in the country. Wages are slightly lower than the national average in our province, although we've seen a bit of a resurgence in recent time. As it relates to economic issues more generally, there is a part of our we have had stagnant population for a long period of time, and a concern about whether or not a vibrant economy was going to be continuing, and to what extent are the public services that support people in health and education going to have an economy that supports it sufficiently as the dominant narrative. That's why economic growth and population growth have been there for some period of time. There has been a significant uptick in the last 6 or 7 years in population in Nova Scotia, and we're actually dealing with a bit of a growth challenge around housing and related issues. So we are inclined to think that part of people's motivation, especially as they moved through the pandemic and everyone was moving online, is that the option for people to move to places where the way of life better aligns with perhaps their urban or other lifestyle has strengths that for a place like Nova Scotia that becomes a magnet for people moving here. So there is an influx. It's related to our quality of life and way of life as well. So we'll see how that all continues to play out over time.
What are some of the major employment sectors in Nova Scotia?
The fisheries, apart from government, which is a significant employer here, a variety of natural resources. The oil industry has been predominant in our region more generally. The fisheries is significant. Exports include Michelin, which is an international, well, everyone would know Michelin tires and related issues. Increasingly services, our professional services, banking, finance, and related issues are growing. Halifax is sort of the economic regional center for a larger, for the provinces near us. So that too becomes a bit of our economic driver as well. Tourism, it's seasonal, given our weather here, but tourism is also a very significant feature of our economic conditions.
And I'm not sure if anyone else has any other questions. I don't want to occupy too much of your time, but again, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or post it in the chat. What did anything surprise you about these results?
Bryan, do you want to go first? Maybe we'll follow your lead on some of that.
It's a difficult question to answer, because one of the things that we do see is that the general patterns of factors that seem to be most important to people's quality of life are fairly similar across the different regions we've been in Canada. It's just that the magnitude of their importance changes depending on, as Danny was pointing out, the subgroups that are involved. But we see similar patterns, as I say, with respect to low income, single parents, rural versus urban, living circumstances and so forth, cropping up even in some of the more heavily populated regions of the country. So in some ways it didn't surprise in that these same things percolated to the surface, and things that did surprise are probably things that are somewhat more unique, to the province. I mean, building on what Danny was saying about cost of living, Canada, about 4 or 5 years ago, adopted the market basket measure as its official measure of poverty in the country. And it basically respects, differences in cost of living based on what is a typical basket of goods and services that people, how much they would have to spend for the same basket in different places. And based on that, people in Nova Scotia need a higher threshold of income to meet the market basket than other areas surrounding Nova Scotia. And I think where that plays out, most importantly as well, is, and this came up in the survey too, like housing issues, health-related issues, is that, major cities like Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal get a lot of press about the cost of housing there. But Nova Scotia actually rose to the top in terms of housing affordability, based on a rating of how much disposable income people had relative to the cost of housing. So cost of living is higher, cost of housing might be comparatively lower than the rest of the country, but because the cost of living is higher and the incomes are generally lower in Nova Scotia, it's harder for people to buy housing stock there of the equivalent type to other regions of the country.
Maybe I'll just build on the surprises, or I'm not sure. It depends on what you knew going into your understanding of this. I saw a hand was up in a moment, so I'll just go to that in a moment, or allow you to do it, Jill. The story of families being led by single parents were really something else, and it speaks to wealth, intergenerational wealth, opportunity, and concerns that I felt at the other end. I used to be in a different life, a lawyer and a public defender, as they'd call them, in the US, with legal aid, and my clients were predominantly from backgrounds that really I hadn't fully understood, and this painted a picture of the fragility of family life for a number of people around housing and other issues. So that's one demographic that I think we're able to unpack more effectively. The other was just the pervasive nature of all things tied to social connections, loneliness, sense of belonging. We have a higher sense of belonging to community than the rest of the country. So that's a strength that we have. But even within that, the way in which it plays out in people's life satisfaction and the need for us to build stronger social cohesion as a high priority that's not getting much attention really seems to be a 5-bell alarm from our perspective.
Taylor, did you want to, I see your comment in the chat. I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, so one of the things that I found interesting and surprising was just how important people's connection to their neighborhood and perceptions of the environmental quality is. I don't think it's surprising that that is linked to well-being, but when we look at what is most important to different dimensions of well-being, whether that's, the hedonic life satisfaction, the eudaimonic life worthwhile, or the more social well-being, like the sense of community, it's the top predictor. It's more important than having positive mental health, or many of the social determinants of health, like your income, and that sort of thing. So the fact that it's so consistently the top predictor of dimensions of well-being was something that I was surprised at.
I think if I could build on Taylor's observation, I think it also speaks to the interconnectivity of all the different factors that blend together to define someone's quality of life. Because, having a type of environment that you enjoy getting out in and interacting with nature and meeting other people in those environments actually is a strong factor associated with increased mental health. And so it rising to the top suggests that for the overall population, whether they're struggling with mental health issues or not, it's a great balm for their well-being within the community. But it has even greater implications across the board, including for those people with mental health challenges. And that's probably why it nudged out mental health challenges more so than mental health rising to the top, because it's true for all people, regardless of that.
Thank you. Lucas, you've had your hand up for a while. Feel free to.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for this condensed information. My main question is about the you've mentioned that the geography matters, but not as much as demographics. On the other hand, you mentioned that, for example, that these factors like community and also the environment is very important. For me, I actually doing my research focuses on these interaction between urban greening and mental health, for example. So for me, it's actually not as much as a surprise, but I would rather, I would like to know how you can say that the geographic matters are not as important as the demographics. Did you make like some analysis, like correlations, or some analysis with life satisfaction that you say that you put it to life satisfaction, how these factors are important to life satisfaction, or how is the survey made out? Maybe that you can say demographics are more important to people than geographic issues. Thanks.
Right. I see you go ahead and I'll add in, because I threw that out, but you would have a more nuanced sense of pieces of that.
Thanks for the question, Lucas. You're right. And, at the risk of suggesting that I disagree with Danny, I don't necessarily, but it goes back to the original point about the intersection of these things. And we know that place matters, but place is very much intertwined with sort of demographic profiles as well. The level of geography that, Danny was presenting with the web-based tools as at a fairly, high scale. And so you've got a tremendous mix of people in that. And so when you're taking a look at some of those regional differences, it does tend to mask the demographic differences based on a finer geography. If you get into sort of the city and get down to the neighborhood level, neighborhoods are very much not just physical entities, but they're also defined by relatively homogeneous demographic characteristics as well. So there's sort of a blurring of the distinction. And I'm sure you understand this, that people that with higher incomes, better job opportunities, more active in the community tend to live in better areas because they have those opportunities available to them. And as a consequence, report higher levels of mental health, physical activity, whatever it happens to be. The demographic characteristics of some of those other, neighborhoods that don't have as great access to green space, fewer job opportunities, lower incomes than that, they tend to be demographically more homogeneous, tend to be on the fringes and less opportunity. So there's a real, blending of both geography and demographics And this is something that in the next survey, we're planning on building in by getting at a much finer level of geography to get at those place-based factors, to see the extent to which, particularly at the neighborhood level in the larger urban areas like Halifax and the regional municipality of Cape Breton, where the majority of the population lives, we'll have sufficient numbers there to actually decipher some of those influences.
Maybe I'll build on this, and I don't think I'll disagree with you on any of that. I agree with exactly what you've said. What we mean by that statement predominantly is something along the following lines, that historically, the public discourse has been defined by what geographic region you are from. We don't have enough of this, you have too much of that. And when we net it out and we look at the differences across the geographies that are related to those political and public policy discourses, there's really the distinctions about strengths and concerns are rather fine. As you get more granular to the question of place, not so much geography, but place-based things, access to the things that you're talking about, social infrastructure, social green spaces, that indeed matters that much more for all the reasons that have been expressed already. What we do note is that whenever we create a population profile of historically and systemically disadvantaged populations of people because of income, disability, and other things, the magnitude, the scale of the concerns that show up, not just at life satisfaction, but across all of the perceptions, experiences, and behaviors in the survey, not all of them, but many of them show up as being more strikingly different than what shows up in the geographic maps.
Lucas, hopefully that answered your question. Do you have any other follow-up questions?
Yeah, thanks. That's totally fine. Yeah.
Thank you. Oops, sorry. Benedict asked a question. Are you able to ask it yourself? I'm happy to do that for you in the chat.
Actually, if I could just briefly jump in, I think
Sure.
much of our literature has been driven by hedonic well-being, like looking at overall life satisfaction as sort of the outcome measure. And certainly a lot of this research is focused on that as well. I think one of the things that's interesting is we have the opportunity to look at both hedonic and eudaimonic well-being with these data. And Taylor, correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is that we know that they're very highly correlated, but not perfectly. And I think within the Nova Scotia data, the correlation is around close to 0.4. And it's highly significant for such a large sample, but it's telling us that there's a huge amount of variation in people's well-being that can't be explained by one or the other. And it seems to me that one of the opportunities exists is to take a look at eudaimonic well-being and perhaps look at the residual unexplained variance that can't be explained by global life satisfaction, to see how eudaimonic well-being distinguishes itself with respect to other factors within the survey that might be more or less important to those people that may not fall into the margins because we have identified them as low income or single parents or what have you. But how much is purpose of life, independent of life satisfaction, actually contributing to a higher quality of life as well?
Maybe I'll just also chime in on the question that Benedict had in the earlier part about neutralizing or considering different concepts of what a good quality of life would be, if I'm understanding that observation and question appropriately. Others could speak to this with greater clarity. I just, in terms of from an academic perspective, but as an organization that's doing knowledge mobilization around this, what we are keenly aware of in a Canadian context is that the notion of well-being, for example, in an Indigenous context is something that relates to this and is directionally like this, but not the same as this. And it would be a mistake for us to put together definitions and frameworks that was somehow intended to be completely all-encompassing and presumptuous about what it means for them. And of course, for the various types of disabilities that people would have, just to give you another sort of frame of reference for this, that too turns out to be something that just it's that nothing would be perfect, would be sort of Engage Nova Scotia's perspective on how to get your arms around what quality of life means. There is more than a thin consensus, however, I think now in Canada about the frame around which this can be put. The federal initiative is really valuable, and all the work that Bryan has led with the Canadian Index of Wellbeing, they're well regarded and embraced, and Bryan has worked with organizations that are specifically from backgrounds that are that might start from a different place about what definitions one would apply to quality of life.
Benedict, I hope that answers your question. Feel free to respond. You might have responded here. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Gundi or Gundi, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. Feel free to ask your question.
It's Gundi. Oh, sorry, I'm sitting here a little bit too much in the sun, so you can't see me
That's
properly.
beautiful.
So it's a really fascinating survey that you're doing there, and I was wondering how you fund this. So I'm from Germany, and we are hugely interested in collecting well-being data at a very sort of granular sort of level, but our efforts already fail at getting something at a quite sort of aggregated level, just because it's so expensive to collect data. And so just to give you one figure, so in Europe, there's actually an agreement that we would have statistical offices should release all their data at the NUTS 3 level, which in Germany would be 480 or so different areas. And then if you needed to collect representative sample or surveys data from those sort of 480 data, just in order, and if you assume that there's maybe like a 10% response rate or so, then that's already 3 million, euros, and it's really difficult to get the support. So I was wondering what your sort of funding sources are. Do you get the money from central government, or is it like a consortium, or is it always like a big struggle to get more hands-on money, or more money? Yeah, your hands on more money. Thanks.
I'll point to two things, and Bryan, I think there are some questions that you might be able to provide some insights into related to this. As it relates to the funding for this, our organization is supported by all sectors, predominantly by our provincial government, and we received from them in 2019 a bump up to be able to undertake the hard costs associated with doing the survey. As we look ahead at the next survey, the things that we are, there's a lot of hard costs. Sending out mail outs twice to 100,000 people, doing the data cleaning, and so on is not easy. But the matter that is really very much in our headlights as a priority relates to building trust and understanding amongst communities of people who have good reason to not trust and haven't trusted and haven't participated in these types of surveys. So there's an extensive plan on our part to continue to build trust and relationships with those communities so that the survey does get filled out on the next occasion. Some of my colleagues who are on the call who haven't yet been visible, Tammy Ewing and Riley Urban, both will be quite involved in that sort of work. And we're in the process right now of diversifying our funding to do that next survey. So we're actually looking to identify all the resources that we will need in order to do that next one as well. Happy to chat online later about the specifics of what that looks like.
Oh, that would be great.
Thank you. Any final questions or comments? Any last comments from our presenters?
Just want to say thanks for the opportunity and the interest, and we hope we're contributing to sort of a larger field of pretty important stuff. There's, I guess, I'd be missing a chance to say this. From our perspective, this is about more than just the data and the survey. This is about pausing to consider what are the superordinate goals that we have as a society. We have been entrenched in a mindset that has privileged some questions at the and not others. And our hope is that the bigger picture is that we're giving easy tools for not just the public sector, but for civil society to understand the stories of our residents much better, and ultimately shift their attention to ensuring that everyone has a chance to flourish. So that's the broad goal, and ISQOLS is doing terrific work to sort of pollinate the globe with those kinds of ideas. So it's a special opportunity for us to share our thoughts here.
Thanks, Danny. Bryan or Taylor, any other final comments?
Just to echo Danny's remarks, thank you for the opportunity to share this. And I think one of the things that, personally I feel is that, as a researcher, one of the things that frankly we often don't have the capacity to do is get beyond knowledge transfer. And I think what Engage Nova Scotia has demonstrated is that you can take that knowledge and really mobilize towards social change. And having that capacity on the ground, is really a privilege to be part of, because, you put your stuff out there and you hope somebody's reading it and getting something out of it, but we can actually point to something where, those impacts are actually being felt within society when you've got an organization like Engage Nova Scotia involved as well.
And one other thing I would say is that if there is anyone here who's going to ISQOLS in Rotterdam, we are speaking kind of about the lessons learned from the last couple of years in making these data visualization tools. And we're, as far as I know, our workshop is on the Friday, and we'll be doing a whole Q&A about experiences in this kind of work in Nova Scotia. So yeah, hopefully there'll be some good chats there. Sorry.
Perfect. Okay, a special guest presenter there at the end. Wonderful. Well, on that note, I'm going to just remind everyone about our conference coming up in August, the 21st through 25th. Registration is currently open, and please do consider registering before June 30th to avoid those late registration fees. Again, as I mentioned, if you're not a member, we'll be sending a preliminary trial offer if you would like to have a taste of what it's like to become an ISQOLS member. We'll send that out in an email shortly after this is uploaded on our YouTube page. That gets you a great discount to our upcoming conference. We hope you consider doing that as well. Taylor, Bryan, Danny, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your important and wonderful work with all of us. You've definitely created a model that I think is worth emulating, and I'm sure you'll be contacted by some of our members in the future who are interested in knowing more about your excellent work. And we hope that you come back in the future and share your future research with us. You are always welcome, always invited. And we do look forward to seeing your presentation at the upcoming conference. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. And again, we'll be sending out the recording shortly. So stay in touch and stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Take care, everyone. Bye.